Awesome. All right, welcome everyone. Where we're going to kick off in the book is on page 1, which Ben was kind enough to remind everyone what page we're on before the announcements. But I had a feeling we can probably find page 1. Heck yeah, Howard. I love it. So page is on page 1. My name is spelt with an I because I am self-centered. It's all about I. See what I did there? All right, so where we're diving in is Bill's story. Now, if you're a little like me, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step in general, I opened up the book and I started with Bill's story. And I don't know about you, I didn't like the guy. I'm like, I got nothing in common with him. He's an old guy. I was going to look up how old he was when he got sober. But oh goodness, anytime I've ever called anyone an old person in my youth, oh goodness, I owe all of you an amends. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh goodness, I thought 30 was old. 30's in the rearview mirror, you know? So I thought he was this old guy. He's a stockbroker. He wasn't. He was a stock speculator, but he's all about money. And I'm like, I relate to nothing about this Bill Wilson guy. But here's my experience. My experience is the more that I have read this book, with people who are properly armed with facts about themselves, the more that this has been broken down, the more Bill has become my homie. He's my guy. You know what I mean? Bill Dubs. We've been joking about Evie. We'll talk about him in a bit, but Bill Dubs. I got a little sticker. Billy Dubs. He's my guy. And so if you are like me and you're like, I don't like Bill, I don't relate to him. I don't see how his drinking could have anything to do with my drinking, my drug use, my codependency, my gambling, my whatever brings you to this all-inclusive study here today. If you're like, Bill has nothing to do with me, what I just would ask is that we lay aside our old ideas and let's come and have a new experience with Bill, because we might just see Bill Wilson in a brand new way. And actually, that's kind of my hope, is that we all kind of have the experience that I do, which is I turn all of these long dead co-founders and people of history, AA history, into my best buddies. I'm like, it's my guy, you know, Henrietta Seiberling, the Sib, she's my girl, you know. You don't have to be quite as enthusiastic about it as me. And so let's dive in. Page 1. So Bill's story. And we're talking about Bill Wilson, who is the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we're going to talk that he was the first person in history to have the vital 3 pieces of information that I need to know in order to achieve sobriety. And we're going to go through and we're going to see his signs and his symptoms of alcoholism, and we're going to see if that relates to us. So it kicks off war fever. What are we talking about? Like 2 words in, I know, already on a tangent. War fever. The war we are talking about is World War I. And World War I, I'm also going to give you dates. Feel free to write them down. Feel free to not. War fever, World War I occurred from 1914 to 1918. It's just, it was helpful for me to put these events and these times in history. So this is what we're talking about, World War I. So war fever ran high in the New England town to which we new young officers from Plattsburgh was assigned. That's just a city in New York, a New England town, absolutely. And it says, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. And so what had happened is the United States has entered World War I. And Bill Wilson, who had done a little bit of military academy, was going to do some officers training. He was going to be involved in training to go to war. Now, when we talk about war fever running high, what it was a little like at those early days, it was a little like, you know, when people like have a gap year and they backpack around Europe or they backpack around Southeast Asia, there was a bit of a vibe like that, you know, like, oh, I'm a man, I'm on an adventure, I'm doing this stuff. Like we are feeling excited, you know, like on the cusp of a grand adventure. It didn't stay like that, by the way. And it says, so the first citizens took us to their, to which we knew young officers for Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. And this is exciting, he's training. And he says, I was part of life at last. Now I'm going to emphasize something, or I'm going to point something out. He was part of life at last. What that means is up until that moment, training in the United States before going overseas, up until that moment, he did not feel a part of life. He felt apart from life, separate from life, on the outside, looking in. Now, that is not diagnostic of alcoholism, but to have a deeper experience of Bill, is there anyone here that can relate to that? Feeling like I'm on the outside looking in. Absolutely. Like I'm not a part of this thing. And it says, I was a part of life at last. And in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor. And he goes on to say, I forgot, and it's like, uh-oh, like we know, uh-oh, this isn't going to go well, but I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink. Now, as I break down Bill's story, I do it in a way like how I do most things, which is a little different. I am going to reference the book Lois Remembers. Now, why am I going to reference Lois Remembers? Is it the most historically accurate book? If I said yes, we'd watch Rob's and Howard's heads explode. Nope, but I will make the joke that like Bill was in a blackout, Lois was the one who had a better memory, Is it because it contains like all the information I need to know? Nope. I just happen to have a copy of it and it's in arm's reach. So that's why we're going to reference it. But don't you worry, we can go through this big book study and we can go through Bill's story without a copy of Lois Remembers. It is possible. So I'm just going to make some references to Lois Remembers. And when he talks about, I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink. If you have a copy of Lois Remembers to hand, you can turn to page 22. If you don't, what's it like being normal? Just living your life. Tell me more about that. Do you guys have hobbies? I don't have hobbies. I got a copy of Lois Remembers. So Lois Remembers, very bottom paragraph of page 22. It says, Bill had been warned since childhood not to touch alcohol. His mother had divorced his father largely because of drink. Now I'm going to point something out. That warning, like, did anyone here ever have some strong warnings? Don't touch alcohol, don't touch drugs. Anyone ever here grew up in an alcoholic home and had that like example? I'm never going to be like that person, only to be exactly like that person. And again, some of this doesn't make us alcoholic, but Bill was a child of divorce. Anyone here come from a broken home, child of divorce? He was raised by his grandparents. We'll talk about that. 1 second. Gonna keep reading. Off on a tangent. Lois Remembers. Alrighty. His mother had divorced his father largely because of drink, he thought. His paternal grandfather had also had bad drinking episodes, but through some kind of transforming experience, he had stopped drinking completely. Ooh, we're going to talk about that later. If Bill once began, he had been warned he too might get into trouble. He believed this and decided not to drink. Later, now this is Lois, his wife. So she's marveling. Later, I marveled that this had been enough reason for a man like Bill, whose independent spirit had always led him into experimenting. She's like, oh, Bill, with your willpower and your reason not to drink. Oh, it's just so lovely, And but yeah, do I know what that's like? Not to have that strong willpower. Girl, never met her. But do I know what it's like to have that warning, Paige, don't drink. Paige, that I remember having a deep inclination from very early on that I was not going to drink like a lady. I didn't know how unladylike it would get, but you know what I mean? So, all righty. So back to Bill's story. It says, in time, we sailed for over there. Over there is to England, to the United Kingdom. Going across. I know, we're back to Bill's story. Don't you worry. Don't throw away Lois Remembers. We're going to be turning to her in a little bit. You keep it on hand. We get it. So in time, we sailed for over there. That's England. To actually begin to do some more training and to participate in the war. And he says, I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. And I want to make a note of this. This is not diagnostic of alcoholism. So this does not make me an alcoholic, but it is important for me to make a note that this is the first time we see Bill Wilson consciously using alcohol to treat this spiritual malady. And you might say, loneliness, Paige. Yeah, loneliness. Some of you guys know I do this whole big book bounce around on the topic of loneliness, but I talk about loneliness. And loneliness has nothing to do with a sense of separateness from other people. And if you don't know what I mean by that, has anyone here ever felt utterly lonely and alone in a stadium full of people? Maybe at the Liberty game. Sports. Anyone here ever feel utterly lonely and alone in a stadium full of other people? I know I have. I don't know about you, but I know what it is like to feel absolutely, utterly lonely and alone in a room full of other people, even a room full of other alcoholics or drug addicts. You know what I'm saying? I know what it's like to sit in that room and feel alone. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, I know what it's like to feel absolutely, utterly lonely and alone in the middle of a relationship. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, I know what it is like to feel absolutely, utterly lonely and alone in the middle of an act of intimacy. And so what I come to find out is loneliness has nothing to do with the sense of separateness from you, from other people. In my experience, we're on page 1. Glad you're here. In my experience, loneliness has everything to do with a sense of separateness from God. I don't know that yet. I don't know that when I'm on page 1 of Bill's story. I don't know that when I'm on page 1 of this book. But later on, when we get to the 5th step promises, we're going to talk about how we can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Alone at perfect peace and ease. And what have I done between step 1 and step 5? I've begun to take some action to clear away the stuff in me that is blocking me from this power. And so loneliness is not about my separateness from you, but everything to do with a conscious sense of separateness from God. Another way to describe that is the spiritual malady. So if you're writing in the book, you could write that down if you wanted. No pressure, but I do hear that's what all the cool kids do. And you can't eat lunch with us if you don't read Lois. I'm kidding. You can eat lunch with us if you don't read Lois Remembers. You're invited. You're included. I'm glad you're here. Alrighty. So I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. So we're seeing him use alcohol to treat his spiritual malady. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. So he goes across the pond, he goes to England, and he visits this place called Winchester Cathedral. And I'm going to share with you what Winchester Cathedral looks like. And I like to have me in the picture. Oh, I'm here. But I mean, it is this beautiful, and it's got like ornate decorations. It's the stained glass. It is beautiful. And he visits Winchester Cathedral August of 1918. And you can make a little note in your book if that's helpful. August of 1918. And the reason I emphasize this is because the war ended in November of 1918. So we're coming to the end of the war. And I'm talking about this because Bill Wilson never saw frontline combat. And it's sometimes helpful to know, because I've been in meetings where people are like, well, he was in the war. I would drink too. But my alcoholism isn't contingent on things outside of myself. And we're going to see what my alcoholism is contingent upon. So I visited Winchester Cathedral. And then it says, much moved. Now, in that little sentence, much moved, there is a lot that happens. Bill Wilson is sitting in Winchester Cathedral, and he has a powerful moment where he experiences God. Now, I said, don't throw away your Lois Remembers. So let's pop over to Lois Remembers. Let's go to the very almost bottom paragraph of page 25. If you do not need Lois Remembers. If you just joined us, glad you're here. I just like to use it because I happen to have it within arm's reach. So second last paragraph on page 25 of Lois Remembers. Soon after his arrival in Southampton, Bill wrote me also about an experience he had in Winchester Cathedral. He was feeling depressed and lonely, fearful of what lay ahead. And so in that, like, Bill Wilson felt like such a coward. He was aware of just the humanity and the lives that were being lost for nothing. And he felt so insecure because he was in the artillery unit. He knew he wasn't going to see frontline combat, but he was still afraid for his life. And he was just riddled with riddled with loneliness, fear, and depression, right? Can I relate to feeling like that? Can I relate to feeling fearful of what may lie ahead in my own life? And it says, but upon entering the cathedral, so coming into this place, its atmosphere seemed to take possession of him. He was lifted up into a sort of ecstasy. Although he was not a conscious believer in God at that time, he felt a mighty assurance that things were all right and would continue to be. So in this moment, he has a sense of peace, a sense of calm. And this is an experience that he has that we are going to talk about, because Bill is going to reference this a number of times. We're not going to get to it today. We're going to take a little while getting through this. But we're going to reference this moment on page 1 a number of times later on in this book. This was a powerful moment where he had an experience of God. And even if you're like, well, that seems, and that's why he's not going into it. It's a little like, woo, on page 1. It's a little much for page 1. But if you're here today and you're like, girl, that's a little much. Have you ever had an experience where you're riddled with fear and anxiety and depression, and you don't know what you're going to do? You don't know if you're going to be okay. And there's something that comes over you, a sense of calm, a sense of peace, a sense of assurance that is not your own. Have you ever experienced that? That was Bill's experience in the cathedral. And then, like any happy-go-lucky, I'm sorry, you can put your Lois Remembers down. We'll go back to it though. No pressure, no pressure. But then, like any, I know, we'll write inventory on me. And like any happy-go-lucky alcoholic who just had a powerful experience of God, he does the only logical thing. He goes traipsing through the cemetery, Like, what? Yeah. So it says, much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. So the doggerel is the inscription. It's the poetry that was written on the tombstone. And Rob's going to put pictures in the chat, but I was slightly prepared today. And so we got it. Here's the tombstone. And so it says, what it says is, here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot. And it's like, what are we talking about? Like, what? And so what he sees is this tombstone. And if you're writing in your book, make a note. And the note that you can make is that the tombstone says Thomas Thetcher, Thomas, and then Thetcher, Thetcher. And he's going through the cemetery. And it's one of those things like, why? Now, this is a replica. If you're ever in Winchester Cathedral, you'll want to go, like, they have the real one, like downstairs somewhere. So you'll have to ask a tour guide or somebody to see it. But this is a replica, and it's a pretty like tall, actually, I think Scott's got a picture of him like next to it at some point. I'm sure he'll do something with it. No pressure, Scott. But it's a very tall tombstone. Like it's a tall one. But it's like, why, of all the tombstones, of all the great, why would this one stick out? Well, it's because Bill Wilson had this childhood friend by the name of Ebby Thatcher, and he wondered if this was not a relative. Now we're going to see why that's important later on. So if you're like, who the heck is Ebby Thatcher? I don't care. Are you going to go on a Throckmorton tangent? Because I bet you are. Just hold tight. Ebby Thatcher is going to be an important person in this story. But of all the tombstones, he sees this one. Thomas Thetcher, and he died in 1764 at the age of 26. And so what Bill Wilson reads is, here is a young soldier, and it says a Hampshire grenadier. So here's a young soldier, Thomas, who lived in a place called Hampshire. That was the name of the community he lived. And a grenadier would be somebody who was in charge of grenades. So kind of similar to the artillery unit, the unit that Bill was in. So here's a young soldier, just like Bill Wilson is a young soldier. And it says, who caught his death drinking cold small beer. And so how Bill Wilson is reading this tombstone. Bill Wilson is reading this tombstone as, here is a young soldier who died of alcoholism. And it says, a good soldier is never forgotten, whether he dies by musket or by pot. And what that means is we don't forget a good soldier. We remember soldiers who died in the line of duty, whether they died on the battlefield, struck down in a blaze of glory, or whether they died by pot. Now, pot was a unit of alcohol. And so how Bill Wilson is reading this is that this is a young soldier just like him who died of alcoholism. Now, the historical accuracy is that he probably didn't die of alcoholism, especially in the 1700s. There was a lot of like waterborne illnesses, and he probably picked up like a waterborne illness and was dying from that. And so they switched him from drinking water to drinking alcohol because it was fermented and not likely to kill him. But he died anyways. And if you're here today, you're like, why is she telling us? Like, why is she going on a dysentery tangent? It's like the Oregon Trail. He died of dysentery. I don't know if it was dysentery, but like, why is she going on that tangent? The reason is because when we talk about history and the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, and sometimes we can get to like, well, actually, this is factually correct. It's important to understand that this is all parables. These are all stories to convey a meaning. So does it matter that Thomas Thetcher likely died from a waterborne illness? No. What does matter is Bill Wilson read it as he died of alcoholism. And so when we get to some of Bill's story, and if we talk about how Bill Wilson might not have been at the kitchen table one-on-one with Ebby, he might have been upstairs in the living room and Lois was there and they had a housekeeper there. What I want you to know is it is the parable, the meaning behind the story that matters. We can get fixated on the details, and I love doing that. Like it is up. I mean, who else is, bringing out the Lois Remembers? So that's what I want to say. And I think it's so helpful in contextualizing some of the AA history. So I will stop the share. All righty. I know everyone enter their seats. All right. So it says, ominous warning, which I failed to heed. Anyone here have an ominous warning that you fail? Ominous warning is like some of you are like, immediately, yes. An ominous warning. Did I ever get a sign that this was not going to go well? Did I ever get a sign that this was not a good direction to go? And then failed to heed is promptly did not listen to. My ominous warning is growing up in where I live in Calgary, Alberta at that time, in health class, all through junior high and all through high school, we had to watch 2 movies. One of the movies was Rudy. I don't know, saw that a whole bunch of times. There was not an ominous warning in that, but we watched this movie. It was this documentary. It was the blue lens or behind the blue lens or the blue something. It was a documentary of RCMP officers down in East Hastings, Vancouver, where they would interview these heroin addicts. If you don't know, East Hastings is like this infamous neighborhood in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, where there's high levels of drug use. Abnormal liver test results. Absolutely. That feeling I knew I shouldn't have gone. Absolutely. And for me, it was that I saw them interviewing these heroin addicts in the most impoverished, drug-fueled little community in Canada. Like it had for years had the highest rates of HIV and AIDS transmission in all of North America. Like, this is not a good place. And they were interviewing these heroin addicts with, like horrific stories and horrific, like, injuries. And it was just, we'd watch it. And I never thought it would be me. I never thought that I was going to end up like that. But I had this, oh, I get it though. Do you know what I mean? I was like, oh, I get it. I get it. And that for me was my ominous warning. Yeah, some of us it's liver tests, some of us it's, like bad experiences early on, some of us it's growing up in a house and seeing what it has done to our family and our loved ones. Did I have an ominous warning? If I didn't have alcoholism, were there some early warning signs that a non-alcoholic would listen to and be like, ooh, I better not do that? You know what I'm saying? So it says 22 and a veteran of foreign wars. I went home at last. Now here, as we read Bill Wilson's story, we might think this guy's ego is out of control. So I'm going to point out where it might not be, and then where it might be a little bit. So he says, I fancied myself a leader. And sometimes people will hop on that and be like, oh, Bill Wilson, just his ego's all over the place. Now, I will point something out. The first is he fancied himself a leader based on the next part of the sentence. For had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation? He had gotten a commendation for his ability to be an officer in the military. He gotten a pocket watch and some other things, which I promptly forgot about. Now, I have heard that everyone who served as an officer got those same commendations, that everyone did. But like, he's like, that's just being aware. Like, I've got some leadership qualities. That's not too out of control. He goes on to say, my talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with the utmost assurance. That's where it might be a little out of control. So what he's saying is like, my leadership abilities, I'm going to be CEO of the universe. I'm going to run the show. Now, I will point something out. So yeah, in that, like, that could be a little bit of that, like, greater than ego. But also, this is annoying, he wasn't wrong. Do you know what I mean? He did co-found a worldwide movement that is still alive today and spawned off other 12-step fellowships. I mean, he might have had a point. Lois would not appreciate that I said that. Lois would be like, don't pop up his ego. But we're going to talk about his ego. Because I would read this, and I would read this as this guy who thought he was better than everyone. But the more we get into Bill's story, the more I can relate to Bill with a deep sense of inferiority. So he goes on to say, I took page 2, I took a night law course. And where he goes is he goes to Brooklyn Law School. That's if you care with the where's where, the who's who, and the what's what. Brooklyn Law School. That's where he goes. And I want to point a couple things out. One, what that means is Bill Wilson is educated as a lawyer. So he is educated and trained as a lawyer. Now, he is a lawyer who is educated and trained in the 1920s. What that means is lawyers, they're paid for the big fancy words. So if you're like, Paige, this book is big fancy words. Well, yeah, that's to be fair. He's a lawyer educated in the 1920s. That's why we've got these big, old, fancy words. It would take everything in me not to call them verbose and antiquated, which is also verbose and antiquated. Big fancy words, old, outdated words. That's the joke I'm making. I know. But also, one of the things I want to point out about people who are trained as a lawyer, they are trained to be very precise, pedantic, if you will. Sorry, now I'm just getting into big fancy words. They're trained to be very, very precise with their words. Because if you are trained as a lawyer and you're writing something like a legal contract, you've got to do it so that there are no legal loopholes. So that is a part of the reason why it can be so important to go through this book line by line to glean the instructions and the directions about what is alcoholism, how do I get well? That's why we're doing this. So he took a night law course and obtained employment as an investigator for a surety company. The surety company was U.S. Fidelity and Guarantee Co. If you're writing that down, you can. That but I was going to say I'll make you fun at parties. That's not true. That's not true. Uh, but it's just a fun fact. And if you're doing like 12-step trivia, you are going to crush it. Like I got you. We'll be on a trivia team. But I want to explain what an investigator does and what a surety company is. Because when that was explained to me, or when I figured out what that was so helpful to understand. So the name of the company was US Fidelity and Guarantee Co. So US Fidelity and Guarantee Co. Rob can put it in the chat if you want. No pressure, Rob. Oh, it's already there. Have a look in the chat. So thank you, Rob. Rob's the best. Alrighty. So what is a surety company and what is an investigator? So a surety company is a company that gives loans to businesses. That's what it does. It's giving loans to businesses. Now, an investigator is somebody who's going to work for the surety company to investigate the companies that are receiving the loans. They're going to see whether or not the company's making money, whether or not, like, it's going down, it's all red and we're heading towards the bottom. That's what his early workplace training was, is investigating companies to see if they were a good investment, to see if they would pay back the loan. And we're going to see why that's important at the bottom of page 2. So it says the drive what for success was on. And it goes on to say, I'd prove to the world I was important. Now, to me, that is an important line, because I know that I do not need to prove that which I know that I am. Do you know what I'm saying? Could you imagine if I showed up to this big book study and I said, hey guys, I'm sober. I'm sober. I'm clean and sober. I've been clean and sober since November 17th of 2009. Clean and sober. I am sober. You'd be like, girl, is she drinking? Like, is she on one? It's like, I don't need to prove that which I know that I am. And I can tell you that I can't relate to, we're going to talk about his Wall Street. I can't relate to that. But I can relate to that deep and pervasive feeling that who I am is not enough, and needing to prove my sense of worth and my sense of value to those around me. Does that sound familiar? I hope not, but if it does, hey, we relate to Bill. And he says, my work took me about Wall Street. Little by little, I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? Like, oh, I can make money. I'll be the exception. And he says, I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was. I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. And you can make a little note beside that. That is the physical allergy. This is not a high schooler finding their limits. I don't know about the rest of the world, but in Canada, high schoolers, we tend to get drunk in fields. You know what I mean? A field party, a bush party, where you're just getting drunk in a field. This is not a teenager finding, yeah, Alex, you're like, yeah, bush parties, yeah. We're not talking about a teenager trying to find their limits. This is an adult man who is at Brooklyn Law School and is showing up so drunk to a final exam for law school, not orientation day, a final exam, that he is so drunk he cannot think or write. That is a sign that he has the physical allergy. That is a sign that once he starts to drink, he does not have the ability to control the amount that he takes. Anyone here ever show up drunk to a final exam? Listen, it was only a midterm. It was only a midterm. I was out of my mind. Can I relate to some of that, right? And then it says, though my drinking was not yet continuous, so he is not a daily 24/7 drinker, it disturbed my wife. Is my experience that people were concerned about my drinking, or drug use or addictive behavior, whatever brings you to the study. Is it possible, like, is our experience that people were worried about it well before I even thought it could be an issue? You know, did you have people telling you, hey, I'm worried about your drinking. Hey, I'm worried about your drug use. Hey, I'm worried about your gambling. Hey, I'm worried about your relationships. Hey, I'm worried. So it was not yet continuous. It disturbed his wife. It bothered our girl Lois. And he says, we had long talks when I would, now I'm going to read this how I read some of these parts of the books. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk, that the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived. What? You did what now, Bill? What? So still her forebodings is calm her fears. So he was trying to calm her fears by telling her that men of genius came up with their best ideas when drinking. So Bill Wilson, as he's saying, he's like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, these great thinkers. Unfortunately, I can't think of like fancy economic people because I don't care. I'm not a money person, but fancy, smart money people of economics that they had their best thoughts when they were drinking. Can I relate to that? Well, I'll tell you, I can't relate to that because my drinking got bad and my drug use got bad very quickly. So my gall was not that unmitigated. It was semi-mitigated gall. I was, I'm just joking. What I mean by that is I got the wet pants behind the dumpster smoking crack. I can't compare myself to Socrates or Aristotle. You know what I'm saying? So I was not like, oh, men of genius, lose their shoes and wet themselves. And it's totally fine. I'm smoking crack in front of the bottle depot like a lady. That was not going to fly. That was not an argument that I could make. But I do relate to defending it with everything that was in me. And the arguments that I would throw to defend my drinking, to defend my drug use, to defend my codependency, to defend this behavior was, you don't know what I went through. If you're feeling the way that I was feeling, you'd have to do this too. You know what I'm saying? Man, I am suffering. I am in pain. I need this to survive. So my gall, a little mitigated. I didn't have unmitigated gall, but I was going to defend it with everything that was in me. Do we relate to that? And so he goes on to say, by the time I completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. The maelstrom is like a whirling dervish. And if you've ever seen anything, any like movie or TV about Wall Street or like Batman Wall Street, I can't remember what it is. Like any sort of like Wall Street or fictional Wall Street. I was thinking about Batman. Like any sort of Wall Street in history, what do you picture? You picture like papers flying and these men in suits yelling, buy, buy, sell, and millions are being made and millions are being lost, and it's chaos and excitement. Yeah, Wolf of Wall Street. Absolutely. We have those pictures. Now, this is not diagnostic of alcoholism. I've been saying that a couple times. What is diagnostic of alcoholism? Lack of choice or lack of control. Once I start, I cannot stop. A lack of choice. So when I say I'm not going to do it again, I do it again. That is what is diagnostic of alcoholism. That is what makes me an alcoholic. New thought. We do have a penchant for chaos, though. Not diagnostic, but you know what I mean? Like, ooh, agent of chaos. Like, there's a thing, like there is like a disaster factory. Girl, I am there. Let me in. Now, if you are newly sober and you are like, yes, Paige, I miss the chaos. I miss the drama of my active alcoholism or my active addiction. What I would say is get involved in service. You'll find it. You'll find it. Like, get involved. Go get on a committee. Go get a service position at your home group. You'll find it. So that maelstrom. So it says business and financial leaders were my heroes. Now, this is a line that has become more and more important. It says, out of this alloy of drunken speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that would one day turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. So that's, again, a line that I was like, whoop, it just went right over my head. It doesn't, I'm like, what are we talking about? An alloy is a mixture of two metals. So Bill Wilson is going to combine his work on Wall Street, that's like one metal, with drinking. and he's going to merge them together to forge a weapon. Now, for most of us, we can use the visual. Imagine a sword. And this tells me something. He needs a sword. He needs a weapon to hack, to slash, to cut his way through life, to prove that he is important. What does that tell me? That tells me Bill Wilson does not see the world as a safe place. Can I relate to that? Now, if you are a little like me and spent any time watching television in the 1990s, you might remember Xena, the warrior princess. Uh, no, a lot of people. Oh, we got Xena, the warrior princess. It came on after Hercules. Now, I can't remember what the weapon is called. It's like a chakra or a chakra, or no, not a chakra. Not a Shaka Khan, but she had this like throwing weapon. It was this circular throwing weapon, and she would have it, and she would throw, and it would go choo choo, ching ding, and it would like bounce off all these things, and it would like get the bad guy, and then she would catch it in this dramatic pose. Wah! So if you remember Xena, the warrior princess, you can visualize that as a weapon that is being thrown to hack, to slash, to cut, prove that he is important, and it's going to turn in his flight and tear him apart. If you did not grow up with Xena, the warrior princess, you can just think of a sword. Now, what I find is really interesting is his use of the boomerang. Now, so Howard, grab your Lois Remembers. Lois Remembers time. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pop over to page 20. If you have Lois Remembers, I think Janice, you got Lois. If you have it, if you don't, that's totally cool. Everyone's welcome at the lunch table. So page 20, first full paragraph, and I just love this because it kind of gets us in Bill's little, not his little, but in his mind and what was going on for him. So Bill always liked to work with tools. As a boy, he made bows and arrows, skis, jack jumpers, and sleds. One day, his grandfather told him that only the Australians could make a boomerang, a weapon that would return to its thrower. Bill determined to be the first American to make and throw a boomerang. After that, no schoolwork was done, no wood brought in. Boomerangs were the order of each day, morning, night, and noon. Bill was either studying books on Australia or hacking away in the shop on a piece of wood. Time after time, he thought he had solved the problem, but the weapon did not return. Anyone here ever get a little hyper-fixated on something? You know, not diagnostic of alcoholism, but if you're like, listen, I was doing knitting for 3 months, crochet, some of those like hobbies during 2020, like, oh, I was making bread. I was not making bread. So it says after about 6 months of failure, and I genuinely love that. Because when Bill Wilson gets sober, he has a powerful spiritual awakening as the result of taking the actions that later became our 12 steps. He worked with other alcoholics unsuccessfully for how long? 6 months before he carried that message to Dr. Bob. I love that. 6 months of failure. He was going to bed in his attic room one night when he noticed the grain in the headboard of his bed. It was just the thing he needed. He ran for a saw and cut the piece out. Since he had already burned part of the headboard in an early experiment, he didn't think Graham would scold him. When this boomerang was cut and sanded, his grandfather watched as Bill threw it across the churchyard. Graham had to jump to save his neck. The boomerang returned to its thrower the way a genuine Australian one would. Bill was sure he was the first American to accomplish this feat. After his previous sense of inferiority and awkwardness, it was great to feel he was the #1 man in boomerang making. And so a lot of times we see Bill Wilson and we talk about, oh man, his ego is out of control. What I see is a human being who desperately feels like he is not enough and has felt like who he is not enough his whole life, and is constantly trying to seek to get success to give him a sense of value and esteem and worth. I relate to that. And if you relate to just like, hey, I'm just going to be successful because I'm awesome, that's great. That's not me though. So I just want to make Phil as accessible as possible. So living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. It went into certain securities, then cheap, and rather unpopular. So he was buying cheap and he's going to sell high. I rightly imagined that they would someday have a great rise. So he was right, that these stocks would skyrocket. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and management, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. That last sentence is foreshadowing. And what he's talking about in that paragraph is Bill Wilson had this theory that the people in Wall Street were losing money because they did not know. We got the boomerangs in the chat. Nope, focus. Bill had this theory that people in New York did not know that when they were losing money because they didn't have information on these companies. To buy stocks, it was kind of like gambling. And Bill Wilson, now, when he was working at US Fidelity and Guaranty Co., when he was working as an investigator, he had experience investigating companies to see if they would be a good investment. And so, yes, his idea was, before we invest in these companies and buy shares of them, why don't I go and investigate them just like I did with this company? And that was a spoilers, that was a genius idea. Now, the people in Wall Street was like, no, that's a waste of time, waste of money, waste of energy. But they did it anyway. So it says we gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle. So this is April of 1925. And if you want to read about it, Lois, the little author, she's got you can read, it's the Diary of Two Motorcycle Hobos. You can find it online. And she kind of recounts their tales and their adventures. So it's April 1925. Oh, and if you are somebody that cares about motorcycles, it was a Harley Davidson. So I've looked into it because I had somebody who really wanted to know. It was very likely a Harley Davidson. And it says, we gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle, the sidecar stuffed with tent, blankets, and a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of a financial reference service. A financial reference service would be like Google. Like, it would be books that told you where this company was, its address, it's like if it had a phone number, like that sort of thing. That's what it would be. And also, if you're reading this and you're like, girl, poor Lois just in the sidecar as Bill's driving around, and she's like in there with the tent and the blankets and the books, and like, poor Lois, she loved it. I want you to know, genuinely, she loved it. There were times she was driving, and I had heard this story about Lois that, like, anytime she would go to like an Al-Anon conference, if there was a motorcycle, she'd always want to sit on it and get her picture taken. She loved it. So there are some times where we get to feel bad for Lois, but not this. She was having a great time. All right. And it says, our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Hey, that would be a really great name for a big book study. Perhaps one that meets at Friday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. See what I did there? Terry came up with the name. It was Terry. I like my big book puns, and I'll take credit when it's me. That one was all Terry. So a lunacy commission is that idea. Our friends thought we were crazy. Our friends thought like a lunacy commission would be, hold on, I got a question. Did she go with Bill? No, actually, I'll answer that in here in a sec. There was a question in the chat. Did she go with Bill in the hopes that he would stop drinking? Not yet. Not yet. And don't worry about it. I got you. There was some stuff where that beautiful question, by the way. There is some stuff where we will see that this weapon is going to be working at this time. So this sword, or Xena the Warrior Princess, that is going to work. So lunacy commission is that idea of like the friends getting like almost like an intervention and thrown in an asylum, and he says, perhaps they were right. I had some success at speculation, so we had a little money, but we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. Now, I've done big book studies with people who did not care about the history, and so I would do things like this that would annoy them. And the thing that would annoy them is the farm is the Goldfoot Dairy Farm in Scotia, New York. that yeah. Uh, and they were both paid $75 for that work. And and then I always make the joke. And the cow's name was Bessie, and we love her the most. I'm just kidding. I couldn't name the cow because I get too attached. And I had a big book study where everyone just put in cow pictures, which was not great for my ADHD, but was delightful for my affinity for cows. I love them. Uh, but the owner had a son who worked for General Electric. And so that was how Bill Wilson got into some information about General Electric. Now, you know how, like, if you wanted to invest in a company in 2024, you couldn't show up to a major company and knock on the door and be like, hey, I'd like to investigate. Tell me what's up. They'd be like, ma'am, something I heard quite a lot in my drinking and using days, ma'am, you're making a scene. You'll have to leave. Only time I've ever been called ma'am. It's only ever followed by you're making a scene. So like that wasn't something that would work. And so what did Bill have to do? Bill would have to build relationships and build connections. And he would do that by drinking. He would go to yeah, this is where it's not a problem yet. Now, I'll tell you a fun fact that arguably I think it's fun. I'll tell you a fact about Lois that I think is fun. But at this point, his drinking and his work on Wall Street is going to be the perfect weapon. So he's going to go to the bars where the factory workers are. He's going to go to the bars where the employees are drinking. And you know that old expression, loose lips sink ships? You know, he's going to get information, build relationships, make connections. And so it is working for him. And it says, that was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there. So he got a job at Wall Street. So he's got a job with the use of a large expense account. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Like as like the Al-Anon in my heart, I'm like, oh no. The alcoholic, I'm with you, Linda. I'm like, yeah, expense account. Woo, let's expense it. Woohoo, But we are people who should not have access to expense accounts. Uh-oh, that's not good. So large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year. And so keep in mind, he had invested $1,000 and his profit was somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000. So he had doubled, if not tripled, his money. He had done well. This was an incredible, genius idea. Now, before I forget, I'll tell you the Lois fun fact. On page 1, when Bill Wilson writes Lois telling her about his first drink and telling her about that, Lois had one of those, she had an ominous warning. She's like, oh no, this is not good. So Lois resolved that she was like, you know what I'm going to have to do? I am just going to have to be the best girlfriend. I'm just going to have to be so exciting, so amazing, so wonderful that he will never want to drink. Yeah, no human power. You know what I mean? And I'll give it to Lois. I bet she was rad, This is just me making friends with the long dead co-founders. I bet she was rad, but it's no human power is sufficient. And what we're going to do is that next paragraph, we are going to see that I had arrived. Bill Wilson is at the pinnacle. Bill Wilson, I had arrived. Now, we're not going to cover it today just because we're right at the hour, but we're going to see how quickly he goes from I had arrived to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And so we'll leave it right there, and we'll pick it up. We'll pick it up there next week, and I'll stop the recording, and we can wrap up with a chaotic serenity prayer.